I want to welcome you to our first panel of the day. So, welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us today in person. And I also like to extend a warm welcome to our Zoom participants. My name is Violet Saena, and I am the founder and executive director of Climate Resilient Communities. CRC works directly with frontline communities in East Palo Alto, Bellhaven of Menlo Park, North Fair Oaks, and Redwood City to build awareness to prepare for and cope with impacts of climate change and sea level rise. We do this by working directly with our climate change community teams who lead, coordinate, and guide climate change programs. So a special welcome to all our climate change team members who are here today, and thank you for your leadership. It is indeed my pleasure to moderate the first panel of the program and an honor to share it with lead researchers and scientists from Stanford University. The main goal today is to unpack climate change, the vulnerabilities that frontline communities face in San Mateo County, and what frontline communities need to be resilient. Our experts will give short presentations, and after the last presentation, I will then open up to our audience for your questions. So please be prepared to ask questions. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first presenter. Dr. Desiree Laborde is a physician scientist, epidemiologist, and professor in the Division of Pediatric Infectious Diseases at Stanford University School of Medicine. She received her MD from Medical College of Wisconsin and trained at the Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital during her pediatric residency and pediatric infectious disease fellowship program. She earned her master's degree in clinical research and epidemiology at Case Western Reserve University. Dr. Laborde studied the epidemiology and ecology of domestic and international arboviruses and emerging infections, with an interest in vector, host, and environmental factors that affect transmission dynamics and spectrum of disease. She studies the human health impacts of climate change, including research focused on innovative solutions to the global plastic pollution crisis. Her current field sites include Kenya, Grenada, and Brazil. She currently heads a clinical research lab focused on better understanding the risk factors and long-term health consequences of arboviral infections and the most effective means of prevention. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Desiree Laborde.
Good morning, everyone. It is my great honor to be here with you today. As Georgia knows, this is actually a dream of mine to meet people who are working locally and doing such great work in climate change and climate resilient communities. So thank you for including me today. I'm going to be talking to you about climate change and health and vulnerable populations. So we all know that every child born today is going to be affected by climate change. And the decisions we make now and how we come together now and partner is going to determine the future for all of us and for all of the future generations. Climate change is here, it is now, and it is us. As you can see in this graph here, I know it's difficult, but the red line is population growth, okay? And so over the last 100 years, there's been an exponential rise in human population. And with it has come an exponential rise in cutting down our forests, water use, land use changes, mass extinction events, and of course, levels of CO2 in our atmosphere. As early as 1912, people had figured out that burning fossil fuels contributed to global warming. It's probably very difficult for you to read there, but it says if you burn a lot of fossil fuel, you create this blanket of CO2, which blankets the earth and traps in the heat, causing temperature rise. And that's exactly what's happening. And where do these greenhouse gases come from? They come from burning of fossil fuels, right? So about a quarter of it comes from transportation. We're burning gasoline to fuel our cars. A quarter of it comes from electricity production. Again, we're burning coal and natural gas. About a quarter of it comes from industry, and then about 13% from commercial residents, that's keeping our places heated, and 11% from agriculture. All of these greenhouse gas emissions, of course, have impacts on health. And so as the temperature rises and we have these increased CO2 levels, we're having rising sea levels, and we're also having more extreme weather events. There's effects in many different parts of health. So there's air pollution and increasing allergens, extreme heat, like we just recently witnessed, and I'll be talking about, severe weather, environmental degradation, degraded living conditions, changes in vector ecology, water and food changes, including a decrease in crop yields and crop quality, and of course, water quality problems. And as you can see listed there, we see these effects every day: wildfires, floods, droughts, desertification, biodiversity loss, plastic pollution, infectious disease spillover events like COVID, vector-borne diseases, algal blooms, food insecurity, displacement, and even mental stress. And the impacts of climate change can be felt everywhere in our bodies, right? So in our respiratory systems, wildfire smoke and pollen and air pollution causes us to have respiratory conditions. Increasing vector numbers and floods lead to vector-borne and waterborne diseases like cholera that affect a lot of our different body systems. Rising CO2 contributes to increased mold production and pollens, and big storms break up pollen, causing more allergy and more allergic conditions. Air pollution from wildfire smoke causes cardiovascular events like high blood pressure, strokes, ischemic heart attacks, and arrhythmias. And then our mental health is impacted, of course. People who already have mental disorders can be exacerbated by weather events and by heat waves. And then these extreme weather events, such as floods and wildfires and droughts, can of course lead to stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, and a lot of anxiety. But we all know also that not all communities feel the vulnerabilities the same. Not all communities feel the impacts of climate change the same. There's some communities that are disproportionately affected. And what determines vulnerability? Well, they're a function of three things. One is the exposures themselves, such as the psychosocial stressors, the biologic stressors, the chemical stressors. How sensitive you are to those stressors is another factor. And then finally, adaptive capacity. How well can your community actually deal with that potential hazard and face those opportunities and use them? So climate change, vulnerability, and health inequity, as we've already heard today, go hand in hand, right? They are intricately linked. Populations can be vulnerable by their physiology, so babies and the elderly are more at risk for some of these events and stressors, but populations are also made vulnerable by racism, inequality, and poverty. For example, in 1995, the heat waves in Chicago disproportionately killed Black Americans because they're afraid to roll down their windows and cool off because of fear of what was going on outside their homes. Hispanic children and Black children are much more likely to die of asthma, and that, of course, is compounded by the fact that they live in areas where air quality is not as good. So again, there's overlapping exposures, overlapping stressors and triggers, and then a lack of adaptive capacity that puts communities at risk. And this is happening all over the US, of course, and all over the world. I was actually born in New Orleans, and when I was young, we would have big storms, but they would happen only every few years. Now the storms are much more frequent, much more severe. I also grew up in San Francisco. I don't remember there being a fire season when I was young, but now we know it's more, it's really like more predictable than the rainy season here now, right? And so we're feeling this all over the place. So let's just quickly go through a couple of these impacts on health. So first, heat. We all had a heat wave just a little bit ago. We know that heat waves are coming more commonly, they're lasting longer, and they're hotter than they used to be. And again, multiple vulnerabilities exist, right? The elderly, pregnant, the infirm, the poor, displaced, or homeless, the outdoor workers, manual laborers are all at higher risk of health-related illness. This graph shows wildfires from 1987 to 2019. You can see the very top of that graph is when 2 million acres burned in 2019. That was nothing compared to the next year, where 4 million acres burned in 2020. And of course, with wildfires comes wildfire smoke. Wildfire smoke is 10 times more harmful to health than other types of air pollution. It causes increased asthma exacerbations, respiratory infections, and even adverse birth outcomes. Pollution itself, air pollution, also leads to shorter life, stroke, heart disease, reduced lung function, and low birth weight. And our children. I'm a pediatrician. I care a lot about our children. Let's see. Oops. And children really need safe, stable, and nurturing environments to grow and learn and thrive. They can be stressed by what's going on in their households, as pictured in that tree there, what's happening in their community, the roots, but then also what's outside happening in the environment. And this exposure repeatedly to environmental stressors leads to both long-term physical and mental stress and decreased health in our children. I work on vector-borne diseases and climate change, and we know that these mosquitoes like it hot. And as the world warms, they are going to be more and more and more part of the world, as seen there on that red graph, right? Causing problems and spreading diseases that way. And there are many different types of mosquitoes, and they all spread different diseases, but they all love climate change, let me tell you. Culex mosquitoes, which spread West Nile, love floods and stagnant water. The Aedes mosquito that I just mentioned that spreads dengue, likes it hot and likes droughts and floods. And then the malaria vector, Anopheles, which kills almost 1 million people every year worldwide, the parasite actually grows faster in the mosquito, and it makes more of itself when it's warmer outside. Even the COVID pandemic can be linked to climate change. So with a warming climate, the flowers are blooming at different times. And so the bats are actually starving, and we also are cutting down their habitat. So they're moving into agricultural areas to find food. They're also sickly because they're starving, so they're secreting and excreting a lot more virus than they normally would. When they come into contact with all those secondary animal hosts, they spread viruses to them, and then the humans come in contact with those secondary hosts, leading to spillover events, infectious disease spillovers like COVID. So finally, climate change is really shifting all of our natural systems. Human health is inextricably linked to the health of animals, plants, and ecosystems. So we have to take One Health or planetary health approaches to really understand and evaluate the impacts, and then also to find solutions. And it's really an all-hands-on-deck moment. We need everyone. We need health doctors, human health practitioners. We need veterinarians. We need climate scientists, we need climate activists, we need community activists and organizers, we need media, we need policy change people, we need the policy makers. We really need everyone, industry makers, all of us to come together to try and identify these solutions. And so that's what I'm hoping is going to be happening here today. We're all here to make a difference, to learn from each other, grow, and really find some climate solutions for our local community. Climate change is both our greatest threat, but it's also our greatest opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Desiree, Dr. LeBeaud, for sharing great information. It is now my greatest honor to introduce the next speaker. And this is someone that I've been working directly with. I can't remember the first time I met Derek, but immediately we started working together to create programs and solutions for communities to address climate change and sea level rise. Derek Wong graduated from Stanford University in 2013 with dual bachelors in civil and environmental engineering and architectural design, and in 2015 with a master's in structural engineering and geomechanics. He was project manager of Stanford's first ever entry to the U.S. Department of Energy in 2013, Solar Decathlon, and has been featured as an up-and-coming designer in the Los Angeles Times, in Home Energy Magazine's 30 Under 30, at TEDx Stanford, and at Stanford Plus Connects New York and Seattle. He is the executive director of City Systems, and Research Manager in Stanford's Regulation, Evaluation, and Governance Lab. Please join me in welcoming Derek Wong.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to share some of the community-based research that I've been part of through my former organization, the Future Bay Initiative, which is now part of the Doerr School of Sustainability, and in partnership with many of the community-based organizations that are in the room here today. But I think most importantly, I want to tell the story of how that community-based approach just completely changed the way we approach that work. So let's start with sea level rise and flooding. I think a lot of us are thinking about Florida and Hurricane Ian right now and the effect it's had on those communities. But for some of us, it hits quite a bit closer to home. We may not have hurricane force winds here, but we definitely can have flooding that can really upend livelihoods. So pictured here is 2014, literally walking distance from here in the Bayfront mobile home communities. Some of us may remember San Jose in 2017, some flooding near downtown. And others may remember all the way back in the 90s an El Nino event that was centered in East Palo Alto. That community memory that is with us today, of course, is so important so that we are reminded of the events that can and will happen. But what science has to offer is the added challenge that due to human-induced industrial emissions, those kinds of events are going to happen more frequently and more severely. So our first starting point with sea level rise was thinking about just what is the cost to San Mateo County. Here are some projections of sea level rise for the Bay Area. There are many different scientific models. The whole point of science is that these are continuing to be debated and updated and improved. But there's general acceptance and understanding that by the end of the century, we should expect 2 feet or more of sea level rise in the Bay Area. And the effect of that, just imagine a bathtub, water's rising a little bit more. So any kind of wave action that happens is more likely to tip over the lip and affect bayfront communities. So what we did in terms of our analytical approach, starting with just training students at Stanford to do some of this work, we take some of these simulations of flood maps. These are basically events that can happen in the future, and there are many different types and probabilities. Small events with higher probability, big events with lower probability, and you can look at each one of these and how they intersect with buildings on the bayfront and what the expected economic damage is. And then you can merge all of those together, kind of like all the hands you could be dealt in blackjack, and add those all together to some overall average expectation of what that potential dollar amount is, in this case, economic damages. And the top line numbers are not very pretty. Imagine if we were to all time travel to 2060 and look backwards over the last 40 years and take all those receipts, all those damages that communities faced, add those all up to one big sum, divide them over 40 years again, and that would look like $1 billion a year of expected damage. And since we obviously haven't experienced $1 billion of damage this year, that means there's some year in the future where we're going to experience more than $1 billion. So that's what the average annualized approach looks like. We really started our work by trying to have conversations with local government partners about all the work that can happen related to this. Can you help with the next slide, please? We worked with the federal level and then on to the regional level. Next slide. And then down to the government county level here, pictured here is Supervisor Pine. But I think the turning point was when, through county-supported funding, they encouraged us to actually start to develop community-based partnerships and really ask a different question of what does that impact look like in particular neighborhoods in this area. And that work then was how I first met Violet and organizations like Violet's. Ever is also pictured here, will be in the next panel. And it was just a whole different experience, the way students would engage here. For example, pictured here, we just kind of made ourselves available at a Cinco de Mayo event in East Palo Alto to just help surveying. This was for Nuestra Casa, actually, Miriam's organization. Julio, you'll remember this day as well. And the first time students are directly interacting with residents and getting a different perspective on what that risk and concern really looks like. Inspired by Violet, who helped form a climate change community team in East Palo Alto. Then through that county funding, we worked on developing a similar program in North Fair Oaks, which is the community just south of here. And they still work to this day, meeting monthly and setting local climate adaptation priorities. So what does that practically mean to the work we did? So most scientific research when it comes to these types of flooding hazards focus on the top line dollar amount, the $1 billion I just mentioned before. And it's a big number, it's a big deal, but that tends to focus the impact and the policy making around big infrastructure projects that can deal with that. And by engaging deeply with communities, we kind of shifted our whole perspective to center the household itself, the household that has some kind of income that maybe is mostly going towards necessary expenditures, food, housing, healthcare, transportation. And maybe they've got a rainy day fund that they're slowly saving towards, but when that rainy day actually happens, then that savings can dry up. So what happens when it dries entirely up? You start to forego necessary expenditures. In the worst case scenario, that can look like displacement from the Bay Area. So we basically changed our whole research framing from the red line to the green and the orange. And the research paper that we ended up putting out really makes the case that a different measure of success should be our focus. It should be this notion of financial instability, where you can take a community and think about what percentage of households is it the case that that green is drying up? And how does that change with climate change? So for example, we do show, of course, the $1 billion number in our research as well, but the bigger focus is, hey, there are neighborhoods in our backyard where climate change could drastically increase the amount of financial instability. Redwood Shores would be an example. But also, there are communities that today already have significant financial instability. We showed that East Palo Alto is more than half of households would already be in that kind of state based on our analysis. So I think the whole focus here is about now urgency and addressing these issues today. Actually just had the honor very recently of working with Violet and plenty of folks here in the Bellhaven Climate Change Community Team on a survey, and it was for the upcoming environmental justice plan that Cecilia mentioned. And some of the key results with many, many households is corroborating those findings. Over a third of households spent over $100 on some kind of environmental upgrades to their homes over the last year. But at the same time, over a quarter, if faced with an emergency expense today, wouldn't be able to quickly grab $400 of extra cash. So that focus is, I think, about really messaging to policymakers that it's not just some future issue to worry about and invest in, but let's really try to build resilience today by dealing with those kind of rainy day fund issues. And that is, in another way put, about increasing resilience of local communities. So the work with communities really shifted that whole framing, but it didn't stop there. Actually, a lot of our community partners in North Fair Oaks had a much more pressing concern. They were basically asking me, why is this county funding focus on sea level rise, which we understand that it has this big risk and it's really concentrated in the second half of the century. But what about today, this year, the kind of extreme heat events, the wildfires we're facing? Where's the funding for that? And we honestly had to take the community side on that point and really argue and negotiate with the county for our very, very structured funding to be more flexible than just sea level rise planning. And that basically meant, hey, let's put it in the hands of this community team to really set the priorities. And they very quickly shifted more of the effort to extreme heat as a more pressing issue, at least today. So here's an actual dashboard that students worked on for the Office of Sustainability. And it turns out that the community was right in pretty much every sense, because not only is there a lot of heat issue, but if we think about the impacts of climate change, it's going to disproportionately affect this part of the county. So the red here is basically number of days, hot days there'll be in a year. This is averaged over the next decade. Let's define hot any way we want, but here it's like a day over 90 degrees would be considered hot. Up in Daly City, that part of San Mateo County, if you look over the next decade, on average, 2 days a year hot. In the hot spot here, and where we are today, North Fair Oaks, 50 days a year. And there's that geographic inequity, but if you think about the kind of communities that tend to be in South San Mateo County, more communities of color, lower income, more families with kids, all kinds of risk factors that Desiree mentioned as well. With the partners in North Fair Oaks, we kind of became co-investigators of our own community-based research. We sort of dug down to the street level and figured out, even in North Fair Oaks, there's a lot of inequity when it comes to where that heat is. So red here is a kind of land surface temperature. Where we are is actually just north of the reddest part of this map here. The part that's further to the southeast, that's kind of near Atherton, seems to be a lot less hot, and that seems to be correlated with tree canopy, which Cecilia also mentioned earlier. So basically, the kind of immediate action that's proposed by the community team was, let's work on tree planting. So I tend to work with students on these kind of quick projects. So one thing we did, this was back in 2020, is we developed a little tool that Canopy, we got some Canopy folks in the house, can quickly do optimized street routing. So they can focus their canvassing, their door-to-door attention on the places where there'd be the most benefit to trees in the front yard, shading sidewalk pedestrians. Then we worked with community partners to get some funding for gift cards to incentivize this work. And since 2020 or so, we've got about 75 trees planted in the neighborhood so far in this kind of optimized fashion. I'm also really excited about where we're going. So I think we'll talk about this a bit, but this idea of a block action team here in North Fair Oaks. And the idea is really neighbor-to-neighbor support, building that social capital. That was such an important lesson from the heat wave in Chicago that Desiree mentioned. And one of the projects we're exploring is this idea of decentralized, portable air conditioning systems. So you can just deploy these when a heat event happens to living rooms, churches, garages, and you have these makeshift cooling and clean air shelters and centers all around the neighborhood. Those kinds of ideas are exciting to me. Now, I have to admit, sometimes these move faster than scientific research. We need to get the work out there. My honest opinion on this, the truth is that academia is one of the only places where you have the luxury of time. Right? And outside of academia, all of us have to make hard decisions, some of us more than others, about protecting our communities, deciding what to do with a lot of uncertainty, and you don't always have a scientific paper to point at. And so I think that's just the reality. And I like to see at least that researchers are starting to roll up their sleeves a little bit and get their hands dirty with that work, going from defining problems to, I think, the harder but more meaningful work of figuring out solutions, because that's the real world that we have to work with. Now, that's also not to say that it can't be rigorous research, and I'll let Natalie really show the big example. All of my stories have been leading to this punchline, which Natalie will share, of a big research project we're doing. One last quick note before I go. I've actually, the last 2 years personally, been spending less time on climate work and much more on COVID response for obvious reasons, right? And this work was in partnership with Santa Clara County's Department of Public Health through my new group, the Reg Lab. And essentially, we are pushing forward on research projects that really flip the script. Usually, the idea is, okay, you do a journal publication, and you hope that a few years later, it's going to trickle down to the real world. We flip that and say, no, let's immediately do work, because we need to do it yesterday. And we worked with the county to design better forms of contact tracing to try to reach under-resourced populations. And we can put out a field trial right away. We can introduce some randomization there, just like how we all learned about the effectiveness of vaccines. And when we learn about and measure those concrete effects, we just then let the program keep going, let it keep scaling. It's already out there. And then we can take a little bit more time to publish afterwards. I think that's the right order, really, for research. So we've got a few papers out, but a kind of central theme to a lot of that work is this idea that the best way to communicate with under-resourced communities is not through government workers, but via trusted community ambassadors. The model is sometimes called the promotores model, and there's plenty of promotores working here in this county. But the work we did with one called Meta in San Jose, they did door-to-door COVID testing, and we could show that through that model, compared to a standard free testing site, we significantly increased the relative access of Latinx and elderly populations. And if we just let promotores decide who to actually reach out to, whose doors to knock on, they do much better than public health experts at finding households that actually had COVID. So kind of obvious to all of us, but we have that research. Now Meta can hold up that research and say, hey, this is the kind of leverage to get more funding for the kind of work we do. I think basically any CBO can do that. But we're obviously at Stanford taking that lesson to heart deeply as well, which is this huge focus on promotores for the work that I'll let Natalie share. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll be back for discussion.
Thank you, Derek, for shedding a light. I just want to add, the model that Derek has shared with you is something that most of us community-based organizations are advocating for. Respecting and also accepting the expertise from the community. Community-led solutions is the best way to address our vulnerabilities. If it's coming from the community, the project will be more successful and will help improve more lives and livelihoods. So thank you again, Derek, for shedding a light on those existing projects and for your partnership. Now our last speaker for this panel is Natalie Herpert. Natalie is a postdoctoral research fellow in behavior science in the Department of Earth System Science and at the Woods Institute for the Environment and Stanford University. She researches climate adaptation for communities and individuals, including how interventions to support decision-making can improve health outcomes. Herpert's PhD is in science communication from the University of Pennsylvania. Please welcome Natalie Herpert.
Thank you, Violet. Good morning, everyone. It's a tough act to follow when Derek's the speaker before you, but I'm really excited to share this project we've been working on. I realized I put names on this slide, and I started to run out of the number of people who I would need to thank in order to make this work possible. The names that are listed include some of us who are researchers at Stanford, but more importantly, it includes the list of people who make this happen because they're from community-based organizations who decided that this was the work that matters. And the names that also aren't on here are the large group of community ambassadors that actually make this work possible. I'm really excited to share what we've been learning through that work. Please know that this is early stages of work, so while I can speak to some results, as Derek mentioned, we're academic researchers. Sometimes stuff moves slow. That's because we're really looking for evidence bases by which we can make recommendations for how policy can change. But the key feature of doing real community-engaged research is that you already have the people who can make change in the room while you're doing this work. So our project is called Our Communities, Our Bay. It makes me so excited based on all of the previous speakers that our communities, this language comes up and again. That's a key feature of the work that we're doing. So this work is focusing on the real climate hazards that are facing communities in San Mateo County. The ones we focus on in particular were coming up again and again based on the projects Derek was sharing or the evidence that Dr. LeBode was sharing as well. These are wildfire smoke. Many of us remember the Orange Sky Day in 2020. These are extreme heat and drought. It is hard to forget how excruciating the circumstances were just a few weeks ago, and the juxtaposition of being here in an air-conditioned, well-ventilated room is very striking given what we were experiencing just 3 weeks ago. And I also want to point out something Derek was mentioning that's very important, obviously, is the fact that we are situated right now along a coastline of the bay that is set to be changing and already has been for many residents in the communities we work in. So we care a lot about flooding as well. Let me share with you who our team is and why this team has happened. As Derek was mentioning, these conversations happen naturally as you start asking questions that have to do with community. That means that the community partnerships are really what's making this happen. That includes climate resilient communities. Violet is here, and I really want to give a special shout out to Kate as well, who is in the back here, who's really been making a lot of this project happen. Yes, to Kate. This is also happening with the support of El Concilio of San Mateo County. I think Anna is somewhere in the room. I saw her previously. Anna's back over here. Thank you to Anna as well and your team. Based on this partnership, the question became, there's so much we want to understand. Where do we focus? And given the nature of today's conversation, it will come as no surprise to the people in this room that the areas to focus really were frontline communities. Who is experiencing the disproportionate harm, and where can we do the most with what we're learning? That became for us areas in Redwood City, North Fair Oaks, East Palo Alto, as well as Bellhaven. And I really want to shout out Bellhaven. Thank you so much, Councilmember Taylor, for being here. We're really excited to share some of what we've been doing because I think it echoes exactly what you were bringing up as well. So with this team, let's see, maybe? What we've been learning. So I want to put out here, I think CRC is tabling outside. I see Caroline's in the back over here. One of the things they may have on their table is this recruitment flyer for our study. The study is ongoing right now. We are in the process of recruiting. We are hoping to recruit 400 households that live in one of these communities. We have finished a 30-household pilot that was seeking to better understand what participating households would think of a program like this and how to do the job of community-engaged research better. One of the key pieces of our work is that we can focus on interventions that can not only help decision-making, but that can actually be applied in someone's home. So a key piece of this is a survey that goes on smartphones. I want to highlight that this requires having a smartphone, which does mean that some of our community members do not get to participate. That is a shortcoming of doing work like this, is realizing we're not reaching everyone. But on this smartphone application, we're able to test out different behavioral science approaches for helping people know what the problem is and address climate hazards with their behavior. We're also able to deploy surveys in real time. When we're asking questions about what people are doing in Hurricane Ian, how people are making decisions during a heat wave, an approach like this means we're focusing on the households we care about most and understanding what they need and what they're doing to adapt right now. Another key piece in this work is that we're deploying physical interventions to better characterize and understand adaptation behavior that could help. We are testing two different things here, one of which I'm going to spend more time talking about on the next slide. But we're trying Medify air cleaners. I know some of us have air cleaners that we use. These can be portable, and they can help a lot with reducing indoor air quality concerns that come up from wildfire smoke, and yet they're so cost prohibitive for many households. Plans like this can make a real difference, and I want to shout out, if anyone has the resources, CRC is still collecting money for a drive by which more community members would get air cleaners. In our project, we're using air cleaners mainly to test the idea that these things are well verified in the lab. How do they work for real people in their homes for preventing the real damage that's caused by poor air quality? This other little thing that looks like a computer mouse is a purple air monitor. As Councilmember Taylor was mentioning, having information about indoor air quality and outdoor air quality is a real concern in the communities we're working in. This is a key piece of our program by which every participating household has a purple air quality monitor telling them about what's going on for their indoor air quality as well as their indoor temperature. I want to bring up two insights so far. I think both of these will not be surprising based on every other speaker that's been up here today. The first insight is that doing work in communities with community members at the table is better work. You can reach more people, and the county has a real opportunity for investment here in models that do this. Whether you call them project ambassadors in our case, or promotores in the case that Derek was talking about previously, this kind of investment can make a real difference, not just in outreach, but actually in the quality of work we're able to do. This picture from April of this year was a conversation by which our group of scientists, community-based organizations, and the community ambassadors we were working with on this program were able to discuss what we were learning, what real problems we were addressing, and find ways to actually make the research and implementation a lot better. We improved the design of our research by sitting at the table all together. The second finding I really want to highlight, and this is coming from our pilot but speaks directly to the council members' points from previously. We have a real opportunity to have better data, and data is a key component moving towards environmental justice because we are not collecting satisfactory indoor air quality or outdoor air quality data from the communities that we care about working in. This is an opportunity that the county can invest in because it can't just be researchers alone putting up purple air sensors. This is a great opportunity, we think, for driving this data that would be needed to make better policy and create better lives for all of the people we care about. I leave you with these 2 points only to say this is ongoing work. There is so much we're looking forward to learning. We're learning about what kinds of decision support tools can help decision making in real time. We're learning what people are doing and what they are identifying as needs in the communities we're serving in order to improve what policy could look like for long-term climate adaptation. And we're learning how these practical interventions can really help with household level health. If you have any questions about this work, I am happy to address them. I know that there are many people from this project in the room who'd be happy to talk about it as well. So just look out for any of us that are from this long list of organizations we're working with. And I want to thank you so much for your time and attention. I really look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Natalie. I'd like to invite our panel to please. And before we start with Q&A, I would also like to make a special mention and thanks to Hortensia, who is not here today. She was a big part of the project that Natalie presented and a partner since the beginning, the inception, and even the name, Our Communities Are Bay. She also contributed to that. But now I would like to open up the floor. I know that we hardly have time for Q&A when it comes to panel discussion, so we want to change the plan, just so that there's enough time for you all here in the audience or in person and also on Zoom to ask any questions or if there's a need for clarifying any information that was presented. So I'd like to open up the floor and give back to the audience here who is brave enough to ask the first question. Okay, Vicky. I see Vicky's hand. We have.
What? Oh, I won't need
We
one.
have runners.
Hi, my name's Vicky. I'm a resident of Bellhaven, native born in the Bay Area. I've worked with a lot of community groups and many nonprofits throughout my career. I think one of my greatest concerns is I see all these incredible organizations coming into our communities telling us, in some cases, what we already know. What we don't have is solutions. And I think we can, and I've been really grateful to some of these organizations, including CRC, who I recently have worked with, is that it's motivating our communities that feel hopeless to change and feel defeated to actions that can help them to do better. As an example, what Cecilia was saying, we have over 4,000 homes that are going to be going into our community of Belhaven, which is maybe 6.00 square feet compared to 17 square footage for Menlo Park. And the fight that they're putting up for 90 homes in west of 101, and we're getting 4,000 homes and a Willow Village. But yet I don't see enough information on our ERR reports that show that there is an impact. And so we just constantly are blocked in literally by 4 main freeways that just continue to give us this pollution. And I don't see solutions to how, I mean, we really need to motivate our communities to make them feel there's still hope, that we can challenge and stop or slow down some of this progress that they see as progress, but it's poisoning us. And so that's my question, is how to continue to try to get our communities where they feel that they can trust and that there's hope in saving this poisoning of our communities.
Thank you.
I can weigh in, Vicky. So I think part of the structure we need to figure out together is how academia can support here, because often the current incentives don't make that work. I think from a researcher's perspective, it's hard to kind of find the window of opportunity to actually engage in an ongoing, often political process, and it just doesn't work with main incentives being journal publications and so forth. It's also potentially on the other end where there's a lot of work to try to get students out into the community to do project-based work, capstone work. But that also has its own challenge, because if it's just one student at a time making themselves available for 10 weeks or 20 weeks, taking a lot of time from community members as well to tell the whole story of the background, and then they just go away when they graduate, then that can be part of what has led to a sense of distrust between the community and Stanford. So I think on both ends there's challenges. I'm very excited about the middle ground we can figure out, where some of the work we're trying to do now really is about solutions and it's about rebuilding that trust. But there's definitely a lot of work we can do on the academic side there.
Maybe I can just add one thing. So as was mentioned by Cam Moeller earlier today, Stanford has just launched a new School of Sustainability. And I, of course, don't have any power in this new school, but I'm hoping the leaders are listening. This is a school that is focused on impact. So we're hoping that, just like Derek said, the way that academics has been, the way that academics are promoted, the way that the academic life works, will be uprooted and changed a bit. Because if we're focused on community impact, be it locally, here Stanford sits in this beautiful area with all these local communities, or global, right? I'm a global health researcher. I care a lot. We're on a tiny blue marble together, right? So if we're measuring impact alone, then I think it behooves all of us to work together. It's the only way anything's going to be done. And as I agree, the trust issues are huge. The sustainability issues are huge. And really, it's about resources, right? And having voices be heard. And so I think just more opportunities for partnering across all the different sectors and really listening, having the academics hush and listen, and then using our resources to actually promote what's working in the community, I think is what needs to happen. And I hope that more and more of that happens. And I hope the new school does a lot of this.
We have a question at the back. Yes, Max.
Hey, this question's for Derek. I know Derek fairly well. So, Derek, when you did that study, your research, I'm curious, did anything stand out to you that was very shocking where you were like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was this bad? Like, was there anything when you were doing that research that really stuck out to you?
Are you talking about the flooding work?
Oh, no, the survey.
The Belhaven survey. Yeah. Well, I think the finding around the $400 not having that handy, a quarter of folks. I think I've seen Federal Reserve Board research on that, but to actually just have the opportunity to replicate some of those findings at the survey level. But I think otherwise, besides just the core content of the survey, just the fact that we were able to mount such a process with the number of community organizations that were able to go and do door-to-door knocking to get 300 plus representatives in just a small community of Belhaven. I think that just shows the kind of latent desire for, yes, there's frustration with surveys that just happen over and over again, but with the turning point and the kind of connection that the survey has, not just to reports that will collect dust on the shelf, but actual opportunities for projects that are community-led. I felt like there was a momentum there that was exciting to be a part of. So I was just really thankful to be part of that experience.
We have a question. Yes. Mike, please. There's 2 mics coming to you.
Hi, I'm Letitia Grenier from the San Francisco Estuary Institute. It's really wonderful to see this group in the room and to see academia, I think, being folded into this conversation more than I've seen before. What I don't see is any private corporations. And what I'm thinking about is, the change I've seen in the Bay Area in the last 25 years, so much more inequity, so much wealth coming in through private corporations. Right here next door to all these communities in South Bay, I'm curious, what is the role that you see those organizations having in helping solve some of the problems that we are experiencing right here in our communities?
These corporations may be in the room and they can put their money where their mouth is. If they're showing up here, they can also fund work to make a difference. I think there's a great opportunity right now, and it's one that comes up again and again. It's this concern about Bay Area flooding. And the fact of the matter is, we have corporate campuses that are sitting right along the bay and making their places adaptable and not focusing on the residents who they have displaced and who are situated right next to them. I think there's so much opportunity there. And so if it takes community-led work, if it takes a partnership with a research institution like Stanford, I think there's just a lot of things we can do. But it just has to start. Those conversations have already been started. So they just need to be followed through, I think.
Maybe I can add a bit as well. There's something I try to impart to students because really a lot of the pipeline is Stanford students going to private sector. I think there's a kind of really important missing piece to how urban land use works, which is that you can solve all the kind of problems we're talking about with money, right? If you just have the money, you can build really, really nice seawalls. You can build really, really nice raised multifamily complexes and office spaces that are just not going to experience any of these issues. The cost of that is that there are only certain people who can afford to live in those buildings and in those communities. And it's so easy, I think, for the engineering mindset to say, oh, let's just use these hammers and hit these nails and forget the kind of larger social ramifications of that work. So I think the first step is just to make that obvious when often it's a kind of undercurrent, and understand that sometimes money is not the sole solution. We need to develop a better social contract with community development agreements and just exactly how these resources are equitably shared. But I just see it every day with Stanford students that it's easy to just think about solutions without thinking about who those are for.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question at the back.
Hi.
With the microphone.
Can you hear me? Hi, I teach at East Palo Alto Charter School. And I was just wondering, to what extent have you tried to reach families and communities through the public school system? Because that's one of the fastest ways to really, really get to the community.
So unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of opportunity to work locally. I work globally, but all of our intervention programs function through the schools. We do a lot of school-based educational promotion, a lot of research and empowerment through schools. I agree with you. Schools are an incredible way to partner with communities, families, and to really understand what's going on. I co-chair the Climate, Health, and Equity Task Force in the Shannon Parker Center at Stanford, and my co-chair, her name is Lisa Patel. She works really closely. She does a lot of work with schools on fire prevention, on education, on on teaching kids about what is happening with the world, and actually on policymakers to actually improve those sort of education events and partnerships within the schools. So I'm sad that she's not here. She was actually supposed to come today, but she's sick at home with something. But I agree with you that schools are an incredible partner in all of this work.
Which charter school are you at? So we've done some work just developing educational curricula, and I think exactly that theory of change, that if you can get the youth excited, that they're going to take that back home. So I think that's pretty embedded in some of our kind of outreach methods, and we have gone kind of above and beyond. It doesn't necessarily fit into the research work, but if we've got students at Stanford who want to do that kind of tutoring and support role, we've done that in Siena Youth Center here in North Fair Oaks, and I think just building those in place, it's good for future leaders, but it's also a way to get to households, so totally agree.
Okay. We have a question in the front here. Leslie, please. Wait for the microphone. It's coming.
Hi, I'm Yao. I happen to have some experience working with corporation. I moved here from Canada, had a experience in the global sustainability team in KPMG. So what I want to share is I'm hearing lots of great stories and insightful research into the issues and the problems. And you also mentioned there's a potential for partnership, and an issue is resource. So what it just came to me that what I've been reading in the news is that the corporations, they are trying to reduce their carbon footprint. Some of them they cannot do by themselves, so they are buying carbon credits. So I just wonder, like, if there's a way integrate like research into the actual impact on CO2 emissions, or like those things into the framework, and figuring out how much you can actually reduce by planting more trees or enhancing the energy efficiency of the homes in these impacted areas. Maybe there's a way of creating carbon credits and trade it in the world to get the funding you need to make it happen. Because I think there is a shortage of carbon credits for the corporate world, what there is a really need in the community that we can make a bridge to like have a win-win solution. So something to think about.
Thank you very much. The lady back in the blue who raised her hand. We have time for 3 more questions before we move on. And so please be direct with your questions.
I just wanted to respond to the question about schools, in that we're here from the San Mateo County Office of Education, and San Mateo County is really a world leader in this, because 5 years ago they created my position, which I just took on, which is the Coordinator of Environmental Literacy and Sustainability. And we have numerous programs working with teachers, working with supervisors and business services, and lots of people in the schools. We also have a youth program. So I just kind of wanted to mention that there are great things happening, and I think there's actually a chance for a partnership with Stanford also for providing that kind of leadership to teachers and helping them implement curriculum in the schools, and also administrators as well. So I just wanted to call that out. So,
thank you.
Julie Hilborn, San Mateo County Office of Education.
Thank you, Julie. We have a question, the hat, and then Warner.
I just had a quick question, and I'm hoping that I'm asking sort of the right panel here. I think you alluded to things like cooling stations, and then we heard the story of the student who'd been displaced from her house. I'm curious, like, what exists in terms of incident response, right? When the communities are actually having to pack up and go, or, you know, what does that look like, and are you the right people to be asking about sort of the overview of that right now in this part of San Mateo County?
I don't know, Miriam, if you think we'll get into that a little bit in the next panel with Ever. I think Ever is going to be in the next panel, can talk a bit about that. There's CERT programs in place, but there's kind of that question of how much of this is public-led versus community-led, and how can that difference be the big difference in terms of getting buy-in. So we're experimenting a little bit with the grassroots side. I don't know if there's a lot of science to show exactly what kinds of programs are most effective, but I think the experimentation is starting to happen.
Okay, thank you. And Warner in front.
Warner Chabot, San Francisco Estuary Institute. I think one of the thorniest questions we all face is, say we completely reforest all these shoreline neighborhoods, and say we come up with the perfect solution that ends all flooding. Guess what? We'd have a wonderful new development and gentrification. So I think the question is, how do we tackle both solving the problem and avoiding gentrification? I don't have a perfect answer on that. I do think that's an area of emphasis that the new school should really try to emphasize, because I think we're about to make some major investments. So I just want to know whether you have any perspective or experience on that issue being raised and how people are thinking about it.
Maybe I could weigh in on this briefly. This actually goes back to something I think all of us have been talking about, which is community members at the table, not just at the table to have their voices heard, but at the table to make the decisions happen. This is something that came up in our project where we were interested in what effect weatherization has in indoor air quality and safety. And guess what? As soon as we start talking about making lasting changes for households, you're talking about places where there are many renters needing to talk to landlords, which is not something that they should want to do. There's also this chance that when a landlord finds out there's a lasting change that's made, that increases rent and drives the gentrification in the households we're caring about adapting in place. So it became very clear that a study idea, which is great in science, doesn't work in practice to keep people in their homes. So I think every answer comes back to, how is the community involved? How is the community driving decision making? I think this goes exactly to your point, and I think what everyone is speaking to today.
Okay, one more question from the audience, and then I'll take one online. Yes, David.
Morning, David Bihar. I'm with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, Climate Program Director. Question for all three panelists to what you were saying, Natalie. Violet mentioned co-development, co-design, I think. To what extent is there infrastructure at Stanford, human infrastructure, I mean, that is intended to co-develop work that can move forward and advance community needs? And as a local government person, I would also suggest local government engagement in that process, and a co-development process helping local government get the research they need. The reward structures, as someone pointed out, don't support that. But to what extent is the Door School or any other element of Stanford trying to build that human infrastructure that can lead to academic work that can help advance community justice and other goals?
I guess there are actually two offices of community engagement at Stanford. There's the one that's helping partner with here today. I saw Wee Ting in the audience. There she is back there. So the Office of Community Engagement is really putting a lot of resources behind creating these partnerships and structures that center community voices and community needs, that actually decide what research needs to be done, what programs need to be done, and there are dollars behind that. Yesterday, I think, was the deadline for the most recent call for actually doing this community engaged and led work. So I know there's that. And I'm in the Department of Pediatrics. There's another Office of Community Engagement there where there's a lot of community engagement in the clinics, in the pediatric clinics, again, partnering with community members and their needs to get their health needs met and so forth. So I know of those two. I'm not sure exactly what is the Door School is opening, but it's still, it's still planning and infrastructure is happening and departments are being formed. And so I'm not exactly sure what will happen, but there's a plan for sort of a thread through the Door School called Sustainable Societies. And I think in that thread, there will probably also be a lot of community engaged and focused and led work that happens locally and then globally as part of that. And then I don't know if you know of other programs.
Yeah, I've got two more models to describe. So there's this idea of an impact lab at Stanford. The Door School has an accelerator. I think those are specifically encouraging faculty to do that community-based partnership work. And so usually they would want to reach out to you, form that partnership, and then propose that work to be really accelerated through funding. And that can include just letting faculty do scholarships and service. So that's one model. I think another model to think about is executive education. Obviously, we teach students, but I think we've done some work in different centers, try to bring in managers from different kinds of local government agencies. I think we should do more of that and really rethink that curriculum to also be kind of mid-level, and really anybody in government can have that opportunity to keep up to date with the latest science and skills, and then bring some more of that pipeline to the public sector, because as we've noted before, it's very weighted towards the private sector right now.
Okay, we'll take one last question, and because we have participants joining us via Zoom, we'll give them one opportunity. So, Anna, can you ask a question from our online participants, please?
Yes, this is coming from a Zoom participant, Mark. With climate accelerators.
We can't hear you, Anna.
With climate accelerators happening sooner with greater intensity than the scientific consensus, aren't we already planning for a too optimistic sea level rise and fire danger? Is our adaptation keeping up with the latest data, which indicates larger flood and sea combinations than even our county planning estimates?
Yeah, I think even the projections I shared are out of date. There's a formal, large bureaucratic process to get all the scientists to come together and roughly every 2 years update these. So I think you can have that kind of formal research knowledge, and that's important to see that continually move. But I also think it's probably true that you go down to the hyper local neighborhoods and bring in just community experience, bring in community science. You can always show something at the more extreme tail that you can act on more readily as well. So I think like part of that structure is really hard to make real time. Which is why you need to pair sometimes the formal research with ideas of community science and just on the ground work.
Okay, I know there's a lot of questions out there, but we have a very full and packed program, so we're going to move forward. I want to take this opportunity to thank our experts for your time and also for sharing your knowledge with us this morning. So please join me in thanking Derek. Thank you very much. So our next on our agenda, you've heard what our experts have shared with you this morning. We want you to create some moments with the people at your table. So please, we have guidelines here to help you have that discussion. And whatever that you have learned or gathered from the discussions that we just had. So please make time and take the opportunity to share with people around you or next to you. And then following this, we are now going straight to our lunch. Is there any special announcement regarding lunch, Bitra?
The lunch will be in the cafe, and please come back promptly at 12:45 for our next panel.
Okay, so you have more than 50 minutes for lunch. So thank you again. Thank you everyone for your attention and also for coming in today. Sorry we don't have enough time to do a sum up, but I hope that the presentations that was shared with you this morning was helpful and informational. So, Faftaita Lava.